you're in the military, do it. And that's true. We are in the military. We did choose a specific lifestyle, and that is not the same thing as being murdered in your class.
Hey guys, it's Delia. I am so excited for you to listen to this episode. Aspen has such an incredible story and she's a really engaging and passionate speaker. I just wanted to give you a heads up that there are some heavy themes covered towards the second half of the episode, including a shooting and suicides and other related deaths to do with Aspen's time in the military. So please be aware of that before you start listening. And otherwise, enjoy the episode. You're in Northampton right now?
Yes.
When did you move to the UK?
I moved to the UK in January, and then I moved into this house in February. And I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. I want to stay for some time. I feel like this house is exactly what I manifested when I was in San Diego. And I want to stay for some time.
Amazing. And you moved for work?
Yes.
Which is like military consulting stuff.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. Yep.
How do you say it?
I mean, I don't really actually. I just kind of leave it at that. But yes, military consulting is a good way to say it. So, my background is as an intelligence officer in the Navy, and I do similar work, but on the civilian side, helping with the civilian relations part of that ecosystem, if you will. So, as you know, I mean, you're Australian, so it's one of our main partners, and I think we want the world to look a certain way, so we work on that problem set.
Got it. And then you do all this fun spiritual stuff on the side.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm a manifesting generator in human design, and it's very energetically correct for me to be a multifaceted person. I've always been really spiritual. I've always been a part-time mystic. I just recently started calling myself that. Even in the Navy, I'm from the middle of nowhere in Colorado. So even in the Navy, I would like joke with my friends of like, oh, just the dirty hippie talking again. And I would kind of like make it fun. And I definitely like have that reputation. So in a good, funny way.
It's such a good combination. I think this is really why I wanted to talk to you as soon as, I don't know, you introduced yourself on the manifesting group or something. And I was like, wait, this person is military and super spiritual. Like, definitely. What is the story here?
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so you grew up in Colorado?
Yes. So I was like, that can go in a couple different directions, so I'm gonna let you lead. So yeah, I grew up in the middle of nowhere in Colorado, and I've reflected on that more recently, especially being here in the UK, back in the land of like seasons. And when I say middle of nowhere, there were no other houses where I'm from. There was no village. There was no infrastructure. There was literally this kind of shack in the middle of nowhere surrounded by Arapaho National Forest. And it was really just me, the trees, and my dog Snowshoe, because my parents weren't really around a lot when I was growing up. They were working in the casinos, which were like 20-30 minutes away. So I just was on my own a lot, which there's definitely a story there about abandonment and learning social skills and that sort of thing. But the story I like to focus on is my relationship with the trees and with my environment, because it very much shaped me. My name is Aspen. That's my birth name. And there was this aspen grove on our land that I just intimately connected with, like as early as I can remember. The aspen trees are these, they're not, it's not a singular tree, it's an entire organism that's connected underneath the earth's surface through their root structure. And it was like the community I was kind of lacking in that moment. And so I watched the trees in all of the seasons and just really connected with them, even the weather. I remember my dad once talking um, about his relationship to what I now know as the mist, but that's a recent development. It would have just been fog then, and how he felt like that was the ether kind of communicating with us earthlings, and that it was like a hug from his ancestors. And I always thought that was fascinating. Um, so it very much informs the way I view the world generally.
So which part of the state was it?
So it's in between Rocky Mount, like the Rocky Mountain Continental Divide, and like the foothills. So I say it's like an hour west of Denver and an hour east of the Continental Divide.
Okay. And and was the casino like on a reservation or something?
Not exactly. It's just the casinos are in a town called like Central City Blackhawk, which is technically in the same zip code, but the mileage is much further. So it's like there's just no infrastructure there. It's like dirt roads and very just rustic. Like if there's a giant snowstorm, like you're just not gonna leave. There's no option. Which also informed my survival skills. I'm really excellent at building fires. I'm really excellent at like knowing what foods to eat in a survival situation, which totally played to my favor in the military, and especially at the Naval Academy. It just informed my creature comforts. There are certain things that I just don't need because I understand that like survivalistic mindset. Again, there's the light version of that and there's the dark version of that, but it's true nonetheless.
Huh. What's the dark version?
Well, when you operate from a survival mindset, then you never really know how to thrive. And so when people talk about like scarcity and lack, that's a term that's common in TBM. Mine's extreme. Mine's extreme. And so I do have a comfortable life now, but I almost have like an embedded limiting belief because I know like how bad it can be. And bad's even relative, but like for example, I always struggled in like the tarot, especially the original deck, because when they talk about like the tower, like catastrophe, like that means something to me. It's not like um something that's like subtle. It's like very overt. And so my ability to deal with crisis and the ability to deal with just things that are beyond the capacity for most people to understand is like really robust, which can be a good thing, especially in extreme situations, but it's not always the best place to operate in your daily life. So there's both.
Got it. And so you were only child?
Mm-hmm.
And were your parents from Colorado originally?
My dad was originally from Utah, and my mom was originally from Texas. And so I think the question we're driving at is like, well, how'd you end up there, kid? So how we ended up there is unfortunately a traumatic story that my grandmother on my father's side was murdered, and they never found out who did it. And so my dad, who is a Green Beret, which is Army Special Forces for the U.S., decided that the best way to navigate that situation was just to remove ourselves kind of from society. And that's when we lived in the middle of nowhere in the mountains.
Oh my God. How old was he when it happened?
It's not a story that's well told, but based on math, he would have been in his early 30s, and my mom would have been in her early 20s because I was actually in utero at the time. So I was like still cooking when this happened, which definitely um had a part to play in my TBM work with like unblocked inner child and that sort of thing.
Uh-huh. And was his family Mormon?
No, I don't know why he was in Utah. um, I don't know.
Do you know about when your ancestors came to the US?
Yes, only recently though. So, and that's another reason why I really love being here is my lineage is from this area. So like, I did like the 23andMe test, and like I'm like 99% from the Midlands in the Great Britain, the north east part of Ireland, and then the lowlands in Scotland. And then I have like little sprinkles of like Finnish and like Scandinavian. And so that would have happened. The immigration would have come over in the late 1800s, so right around the gold rush time, or the mining time. And we actually changed our name to be less Irish. So my our name was an Irish name. I actually don't know what that name was, and we changed it to Bentley because it was less immigrant focused, and times were tough for Irish folks in that time. So,
Got it. And so what was your upbringing like, other than just kind of a lot of solitude and time in nature?
I mean, that's the short answer is a lot of solitude and time in nature. I had this awesome yellow lab named Snowshoe, and Snowshoe and I just tromped around the woods together. So that's what I remember mostly from my childhood. I do, unfortunately, also remember like a fair amount of abuse and um, things are not so great. And when I was a teenager, I left a lot. I was just like gone a lot. So I would kind of couch hop with different, classmates and that sort. I got into, the party scene, which wasn't serving me, but teenagers do teenager things. So I partied a lot. I worked a lot. So I got my first job when I was 15. And then I worked full time kind of since then. And then the Navy called me when I was a junior in high school. I was turning 17. I was 16 at the time. And I was like, oh, yes, like that's the way out. That's how we're going to do it. So I joined the Navy.
Was the abuse to do with like your dad's time in military?
It's a difficult question. It's got to be. And I think both my parents just had a really traumatic life. And so when they met each other, it's not like they went to therapy and like became the best versions of themselves. They fed off of each other, and I think they did the best that they could, if we're being totally fair. Um and sometimes when we do the best we can, it doesn't always yield the outcomes that we want. And so, where did the abuse come from? I think that they just didn't know any better. And that's that. I think that how we make decisions in our adult lives is ultimately our decisions to make, but we have to kind of be presented with a certain set of circumstances that allows us to grow in those opportunities. And if those opportunities don't present themselves, then there's no real room for change. And I think that my parents are an example of that.
Could you talk to anyone about it?
Yeah, I mean, I did, especially in the Navy. I After I joined the Navy, I was a cryptologist, and so I was very much like kind of like the main character in my own story, and I'd like had this like kind of like not secret, but like this almost like secret background. And so like now I was like cool and doing things and pretended like none of that stuff ever happened. And of course it did happen, and that's not how real life works. And so yeah, like I went to therapy and I spent a lot of time in therapy, especially when I was at the Naval Academy, because a lot of the experiences I felt as a plebe, my freshman year at the Naval Academy were very similar to how I felt growing up. And I effectively ran away from home, but I didn't want to run away from the Naval Academy. So I had to face some of these things, and I did that in therapy.
Mm-hmm. So did you enjoy school otherwise?
In high school, no, not at all. I was just angry. I was just so angry, and I was vicious, and I was really violent because that's all I really knew. And I was just angry and misunderstood. So in high school, I thought school was mostly a waste of time, and I really loved math, and I was quite good at math. And I had a calculus teacher um, who believed in me and like asked me follow-on questions about why I was the way that I was, and she really turned my life around in a lot of ways. And so she introduced me to like mock trial, and that's what got me into like the more auditory form of argument making, and that got me into like more government style work. And so it really she had a really pivotal role in reshaping the way that I thought about structure and authority, and that played well for the rest of my career. But had she not been like a tender soul, then things probably would have been even harder in my adult life than they were. Later in life, though, like in college and especially now, I describe myself as an academic at heart. I mean, you can see all the books. I read pretty incessantly. I love learning, especially experientially, and like backing it up in academia. So I love school now. And I love learning. So, and I think I always loved learning, but in high school, I couldn't see past my own anger towards like the system, which was just it was like a me versus the world mentality. And so school was another part of the world that I was just fighting incessantly. And then I realized later that that's not how that works. And there's more to life than just being angry all the time.
What was the school like that you went to?
My high school,
Yeah.
very small. There was like 50 kids in our graduating class, so very small. Pretty much like professional ski bums. So like we are very outdoorsy people, very rustic people. We all skied, we all whitewater rafted, we all hiked, we all just, I mean, those are some of my best memories, honestly. Like I didn't like I drive a Subaru now. I drove a Subaru then, and at any given time, I had to change of work clothes, my one man sleeping bag, and alcohol in my car all the time. And so we would have like camping parties like after work and such, where we would just drive to no man's land in the middle of the forest and just get out and hike a little bit and start big fires. That it was safe. Again, we were very safe people because that was our land. That's how we functioned. So anyway, big fires, lots of booze, lots of parties, and just staring at the stars and enjoying music and that sort of thing. So I'm sure other people viewed it as very reckless, but we thought we were doing just fine. So
And what kind of jobs were you doing from 15?
service industry. So I was host and a bartender and like a cashier, like to go stuff, and server. So just restaurant work. It's a tourist town, so like there's a lot of restaurants. There's a lot of just like tourist industry style jobs.
Huh. The same town where the casino was.
Not exactly. So all these places are very spread out. So where I went to school was like closer to like a different part of like more of like the highway I-70. Whereas like you have to take, so like you can go right and go towards I-70, or you can go left and go towards the casinos. So that fork in the road is where we all are. So like not exactly, which I realize is a little confusing, but
What did your parents do at the casino?
my mom's a cocktail waitress and my dad was just a manager.
Oh my God, sorry. I
Yeah.
love talking to Americans because it's like so different. Like state by state, even town by town, it's like so different how people grow up and like what it's like.
Yeah.
Anyway, I have spent a lot of time in Colorado because my ex-boyfriend's from Colorado, so we'd go
Oh yeah, what part?
at Denver.
Okay.
So
Do
we'd
you
go
have a part? What was it?
I can't remember
It's
what it's
okay.
called.
It's totally fine.
This
Did
is
you ever go
like,
to a concert at like Red Rocks?
yeah, I've been to Red Rocks.
Okay. So Red Rocks and then like keep going west. And then if you've been to like the ski resorts like Vail and that sort of
Yeah.
area, before you go through that really long tunnel called Eisenhower Tunnel, you have a couple of towns. One of those towns is a town called Idaho Springs.
Yeah, I remember that.
Okay, so if you remember that, then Bojo's, it's like that Colorado style pizza. It's very famous if you know the area. That's where most of us worked.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and but that's called Clear Creek County, which is where I went to school. But that's not where I grew up. I grew up in Gilpin County, which was a neighboring county.
Got
But
it.
again, this is the mountain, so it's very spread out. We're talking like a lot of land. This is not like a baseball throwaway. This is like these are long drives.
Did you have a car from really young?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, my parents, to their credit, my mom would. There was a road that was built like when I was like young, called Central City Parkway, and that parkway allowed me to go to a different school, which was Clear Creek. Gilpin was like graduating classes of like 10 or 15 kids, like truly remote. Clear Creek wasn't that much bigger. It was like 50, 60 kids. Denver, for context, is like 500 kids. So I went to a small school, but Gilpin was like that much smaller. So, yeah, like I said, it wasn't all bad. I went through a lot growing up for sure. And I think my parents did the best they could, and they did. My mom did schlep me until I had a driver's license. Like, she absolutely did that.
And did religion play a role in your upbringing at all?
So yes and no. And this is something I'm really grateful to my father for. My dad was always spiritual, but never religious. And so there was a Methodist church in Central City, which I recently made a connection to because that's like really maybe it's not the only church, but it's the only church I remember. And that Methodist church, and Central City, before it was a casino town, was a mining town. So there's mining all over. Like my high school mascot was the Gold Diggers, like truly a mining town. It didn't take on a different meaning until the Kanye West song. Lucky me, I was a Palms girl, a dancer when it came out. So you best believe we had a dance. Anyway, and that mining town, most of it, like the first inhabitants of that mining town, came from miners from Cornwall, actually. And most of the miners in Cornwall were Methodist. And I didn't know that. So most likely the Methodist church in the very tiny town where I grew up near came from Cornwall, of all places, which is a section of the UK that's like very mystic, just for anyone who's listening. So that was a really cool connection to make. So my dad was not religious, but he was spiritual. And he wasn't around too much, but when he was, he would take me to different churches around the state. So some were Catholic. We even went to Jewish synagogue. We went to Methodist. We went to Baptist. We went to a lot of different denominations just as like a kind of like a flavor test. And of course, I didn't know that that was unusual until much later in life. But that totally shaped my ability to see all religions for an expression of spirituality and understand like the root system and how it's all connected. My dad would repeat things often. He does that. But one of the things he repeated was that to him, it's all the same thing. And he would often say like Jesus, God, Allah, it's all the same thing, and that we're all fighting for no reason. And I gained only greater awareness of that throughout my life, experientially, from living abroad a lot, and also academically from just studying world history and world religions in school.
Cool. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, and then what was the call? How did the call to go to the Navy come about?
Well, like I said, they called me, so I was kind of, party girl, 2.9 GPA, will never be able to afford college in the United States without a scholarship, not getting a scholarship, no GPA. So, like, I'm in this, like, circle where I know that if I stay, it's probably not going to go well, and kind of feeling, yeah, I mean, I want to say destined for greater things, but maybe that was too high-minded for where I was at the time. But knowing that I did not want to stay in Clear Creek, Colorado, I wanted to do things with my life, and the Navy called me. They recruited me, and I said yes.
How does that work?
I mean, good question. I think that, so from what I understand, recruiters kind of get names and phone numbers of like every junior in high school, which, like, as I reflect on it, that seems kind of invasive, but I didn't question it at the time. So
Wow, so they literally phone you up and it's like, hi, it's the Navy. Do you want to join?
that's exactly how it went for me. I don't know if that's still how they do it, but yeah, that's exactly how it went. I have a clear memory, actually. I was working at Bojo's, and my phone rang and I didn't recognize the number, and I, answered, and they were like, yeah, this is Petty Officer so-and-so. I'm from the Navy. Is now a good time to talk? And I'm like, okay, sure.
Wow. And then what? You were like, okay, I'll do it.
Yeah, I mean, it was, yeah. So my dad was a Green Beret, so I wasn't, like, I didn't know these people. They all kind of died before I got the opportunity to know them. But most of my family on my dad's side is either in like law enforcement, military, or like cowboys. So like we're very rustic in our lineage. So my grandfather, who I did not know on my dad's side, he was a Navy cryptologist. And my dad was a Green Beret, and he would talk all the time about like, you get paid to travel, like, yes please. And he would like talk about his time pounding sand in different parts of the world. And so I was definitely pre-exposed to it. And so when the Navy called me, I was like, oh, perfect. Like, that's my second chance at life. And I very much viewed it that way. So I did well on the ASVAB, and I was driven despite being kind of a pain in the rear. And they offered me a Navy cryptology job, and it doesn't get better than that. So sure did. Off we go.
And were your parents supportive?
Very much so. Yeah.
Do you know what they wanted for you growing up?
General success, I would say. I don't think that they had like a real goal in mind. I think that if they did, my life probably would have turned out a little bit differently and would have been a little bit more channeled, but they didn't have a lot of time to like shape me per se. So I think that they felt the same way that I did about like, oh, thank God, like a second chance at life. get out, go do things. We can't support you. You can't support you. So like, let the Navy support you. And I did. So I think that they felt the same way that I felt about it. And in some ways were probably relieved that I was as excited about it as I was.
Mm-hmm. And so where's the Naval Academy? Is that Ann Arbor or am I making it up?
In where?
Ann Arbor?
Annapolis. So
Oh, what's Ann Arbor? Is
close-ish.
that a place? Is that
Ann
the
Arbor,
airport?
I think, is in Michigan. But I don't know, actually. I've heard that name, Ann Arbor, but I don't actually have context for it.
Okay.
So, important distinction here. I enlisted in the Navy as a cryptologist when I was 17. And then I went to the Naval Academy. So the Naval Academy is actually like extremely difficult to get into. You need a congressional nomination. You need to be like the valedictorian of your class. Like, it's extremely difficult to get into. So my peers when I was at the academy were like infinitely smarter and better than I was in like every way. But I had my skill sets, and I earned a place there just like everybody else. And so at the academy things like really paid off. So I enlisted when I was 17. My first job was at the National Security Agency in Georgia. This was at the height of the global war on terrorism, and I did well there. And I applied to the Naval Academy and got in, to my surprise. So I went to the Naval Academy in 2014 and I commissioned in 2019. I commissioned as a naval aviator. And I did my solo, which means like you fly the airplane by yourself. And most people, when they finish their solo, are like on cloud nine. They're like really jacked on life. And I did not feel that way. I hated it. So I like land the airplane and I'm like, wow, I never want to do that again ever. So I'm like taxiing back, and I called a mentor and just said like, sir, I don't think this is how I'm supposed to feel. And he was like, aw man, because he had experienced that like high on life mentality. He was like, okay, fine, let's get you into a job that you enjoy. And that's what got me into naval intelligence.
Cool. Okay, so the Naval Academy is like 4 years studying and
Correct.
doing
Yeah.
Navy stuff.
Mm-hmm. Precisely.
And wait, is it near Baltimore?
Mhm.
Am I just totally off?
No. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
Your
okay, cool.
knowledge of United States geography is quite good. This is London. Yeah, exactly. It's like 35 minutes from Baltimore.
Got it. Okay, so you had a good time there?
I'm really grateful for my time there. I think it very much shaped me as an individual. It made me a hell of a lot tougher as an individual. Um, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. But did I like love it at the time? No. It's very hard. And doing hard things at the time is not always enjoyable. And that would be true for my time at the Naval Academy as well.
Yeah, I just read in your newsletter how you say, I can't remember who it was, if it was the recruiter was like,
Yeah.
women in the Navy, you're either a bitch, a slut, or a dyke.
Yeah. And like even saying those words like now are like, do you want to say that out loud again? But at the time it was very normal. Yeah. And so that was like an introduction to like how people felt about women in the military. But at my first command and as an enlisted sailor, I didn't really feel that, or at least I didn't think I did. And I think in retrospect, I might have been like kind of part of the problem because I enforced some ideas by, let me be more clear. So like if a woman was reflecting to me that she felt some sort of like sexism, in my head it sounded like an excuse, and it sounded like she should just work harder. And I'm not proud of that. I don't feel that way anymore. But at the time, that's what I was kind of like made to be. I mean, I was a puppy. I was like 19 years old. So, um, I'm not proud of that. And like I said, I think I was part of the problem in my enlisted days. And then when I got to the Naval Academy, the women I was around were just phenomenal. Like we were the minority. We were less than 30%, but we were mighty, mighty. Like hear me roar, mighty. And I was just so inspired by that. And I had a clear moment. I think I was a sophomore, and we were in ethics class, and a captain of the Navy in uniform, teacher of ethics class, pulled me aside after an ethics debate and said, "I think you sound too authoritative when you talk." And I said back to him, "Sir, I thought we were training to be naval officers. Did you say that to my male counterparts?" And he was instantly livid. And I thought that I didn't think that was going to end there. I thought that that was going to be like me being in trouble for being disrespectful, or maybe not that overtly, but like him effectively gossiping to like make things harder for me at the Naval Academy, which is very easy to do. And that I don't think that necessarily was the case, but there was absolutely overt sexism, and it was fascinating because it was like being in a different time. Like people truly thought that we didn't belong there. They truly thought that we did not earn a place there. And hearing that like in real life, it was no longer a it was no longer hypothetical. It was very in your face. And thankfully, like my classmates, women, our mentors, collectively, we just did not accept that. And that's what I mean, like, hear me roar, mighty. Like, there was no question. The women just kicked ass and took names. So there was no tolerance for that.
Great. That's still, for some reason, I was thinking it could be like 10% or something. But if it was like a quarter, I mean, it's
Yeah,
still
it's about a
a
quarter.
minority, but it's like you've got numbers.
We're getting there. Yeah, exactly. It's definitely, yeah, you're getting there. It's not 50-50, but it's the military. So, like, are you ever going to get to 50-50? And then that, like, raises the question of, like, quotas. And what does that do? And then, and this is a really hot topic right now, so I want to be mindful, but, like, at what point does the quota no longer serve the community of which you want to be? Because at the end of the day, the armed services are a lethal tool to affect what a nation wants, both from its sovereignty and from its role in the geopolitical sphere. And that will always be that will always be the football. So if a quota, and we don't have quotas for the record, but if we did, they would have to be in context of serving that greater good. And then so the counter argument is like, yes, you serve that greater good, but ultimately it's for Americans, right? And therefore should be reflective of the American population, right? That's a fair point. So there's always that push pull of what the effect is with percentages and what a force and a healthy force looks like, and that sort of thing. So that's a bigger philosophical topic, but that's how it played out in my life.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if you had just stayed on like how you enlisted, is that the path? I know there's like a massive divide in the UK because it's like a class thing, how there's like soldiers and then officers, and it's like, whereas so if you go to the Naval Academy, then it's like you're on the officer path, versus if you hadn't, you'd be on
Good question. Good question. I have never been asked that question directly. And I think I think that that's almost intentional because of the way I present myself. And that's something I should probably do some work around, because I definitely feel that jumping of class. I definitely feel that as an enlisted sailor, especially kind of coming from nothing to be a graduate of the Naval Academy, I'm very proud of that because I very much rose in my station, if you will. And I think most people would not explain it in those terms because we don't overtly have that class divide in the US, but covertly we absolutely do. We absolutely do. And that's playing out in real time with, and how do you measure a class? Do you measure it by your income? Do you measure it by your level of education? And how does that play out in your real life? Those are questions that Americans are very much facing now, and it's playing out in our political climate. And for me, like I said, I am proud of that, and I feel kind of caught between two worlds. I feel caught between like the elites and never really being accepted by the elites because I'm just a prior, just a Mustang. I will never have the experiences that some of my classmates have had. I'll never be quite as smart as them or make arguments as quick as them. And so I will always never quite be one of them. And I'm not a part of my former class, if you will, either, because I do earn a certain amount. I do have an elite degree, an elite resume, and so I'm no longer a part of that class either. So what does that look like now? I don't think it plays as much of a role in my everyday experience, but the way it plays out now actually is through my insecurity. So I am insecure that I'm never going to be one of the elites. I am insecure that I'm never going to be quite as smart as them or whatever. And so when I show up in my day job, even now, I might act more aggressively than necessary to prove that I belong there. And that's not serving me. And I know this, and of course that's where TVN comes in, that's where like doing the work comes in to live a more embodied and integrated life. But the question of jumping class is underneath the surface for sure.
Interesting. But yeah, there's no reason why you can't be as smart or whatever. Like, I feel like that's all just made up.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I do too. I do too, of course. And I think that cognitively, but boy, do I feel differently in moments. And, especially like in specific, like, especially at the academy, like there would be times where I would, be liaisoning and doing like diplomacy work, or like, be at places that people of my situation would just never dream of. And it would be in those moments where I felt like I didn't quite belong. So then I would wear a really effective mask to prove that I belonged. And that's not how real life works. That's not how integration works. So that's a lesson that has continued to play out in my life.
Interesting. Okay, and then what was your experience like when you started serving? Or whatever it's called. Sorry, I don't know the terminology. Like after you graduated.
Oh, well, so that's its own story. Gosh. So like I said, I commissioned as an aviator, but
why do they have aviators in the Navy? Isn't that for the Air Force?
I'm so glad you asked. So we have aviation in the Navy because we are actually the ones who establish air power and superiority. When an aircraft carrier deploys, or even when independent seeming smaller ships deploy for that sea power and projection, an aircraft carrier has an entire air wing attached to it. So all of that TAC air, that tactical aircraft, the fighters, come from the aircraft. So you're able to take off and land on a moving target, on a moving lily pad in different parts of the ocean. So you're able to just maneuver and have a very maneuverable footprint at any part of the world effectively. So naval aviation plays a critical component in our joint operating picture. I'm mindful that we're on a public podcast and I'm not super familiar with your audience, so I don't think that doing a deep dive in military doctrine would be the most appropriate thing to do in this moment. But naval aviation is, they say that NATOPS, our doctrine for naval aviation, is written in blood because a lot of people have died trying to do traps on aircraft carriers. So it's a very proud community. Most of my friends are still in Navy aviation. Top Gun, if you're familiar with that movie, that's a naval aviator movie. It's not an Air Force movie. That is all about naval aviation. I'm very passionate about it, so I'll pause there just so we don't get derailed too much. But yeah, that's naval aviation.
Okay. But you went into intelligence instead.
Yeah, and that's because I finished my solo, and I hated it. I didn't just not love it. I hated it, and that was really sad. I worked very hard to be a naval aviator, and I love the culture, and I love the idea of it, but in real time, it was a trepidous situation for me. And so when you're in, so a 0G means no gravitational pull. So 0G means it's a safe environment. It's a colloquial term. And in a 0G environment, I love the idea of it. But in a high stakes game, when you're pulling G's, negative or positive, I didn't love that. And you have to love it to do a job like that. It's a very demanding, very risky, very competitive job, and you have to love it. There's just no two which ways about it. And I did not love it. So I decided to go back to what I loved, which was the intelligence community.
And so did you have a good experience working the following years?
So yes and no. I had I had a couple of capital T traumas right after I commissioned. One of them, that's why I hesitated when you asked the question the first time. One of them was a active shooter while we were in training at Pensacola. It was a Saudi Arabian flight school student who opened fired on our building and murdered one of my classmates who I considered a brother. And that really shook up our life. And I had a pretty heavy role in the aftermath of that scenario. That plus an additional capital T trauma that happened before I went to flight school left me in not a great place, and I tried to seek help often, but constantly moving, operational requirements and that sort of thing, I never quite got it. And so when I was voluntold, when I was told that I was going to the Middle East to be a department head for a task force, I was unwell, and I told them that, but I went anyway, and it didn't go well. It did not go well. My body shut down. My internal organs were failing, liver, gallbladder, kidney, failing. So I spent a lot of time in the hospital. I was behaving terribly because I was super sick. And I was medically evacuated from the Middle East. And so that's what put me in San Diego. And when I got to San Diego, I was told it was going to be 6 to 8 weeks for a medical appointment. And that was crazy. I was dying. my husband took me back to the emergency room, and I pretty much immediately lost all agency, and fighting the Western healthcare system was a re-traumatization in every way. And I felt really powerless and betrayed and heartbroken, all of the things. And I couldn't get care. I could not get a damn doctor's appointment consistently, and that was not working because I was dying, and I have a pretty supreme will to live. Like, I have this really visceral like will to live, and a lot of my friends were dying, and that led me to holistic healthcare. So I got into chiropractics and acupuncture, neuromuscular massage, that sort of thing. And I started to feel a lot better. And so, in tandem to my health crisis, a lot of my friends and classmates were dying, mostly because they were also unable to get healthcare. And I think that that's criminal. So that's where I started Healing Can't Wait. So it kind of comes full circle. The podcast I had been on in San Diego mostly had to do with Healing Can't Wait. I do have my entity, Aspen Arora, which is my married name, Aurora. But those podcasts were about Healing Can't Wait. And so what Healing Can't Wait does, since we're on the discussion, is connect active duty and veteran personnel to holistic healthcare providers now, not when it's convenient for the system and we pay for it. So the moment that was kind of birthed into existence was I got another phone call. I think this was like the 8th or 9th phone call that my friend Julian had passed away, and I was doing better, so I had more energy, and I just like screamed into the void that I don't want 22 push-ups. I want healthcare, and I want my friends back, and I can't have them back. So now what? I can't fix the medical system. That's beyond my capacity. So what can I do? And the answer that arrived was to give people, my friends, access to the same care that I believe healed me and allowed me to continue living in this world, and arguably pretty successfully, right? I mean, I don't think, I don't, it's not all doom and gloom. But that was the most recent pet project.
So were you losing friends like to suicide or in combat or
So not
other
in
things?
combat. Not in combat, but lots of suicide, blood clots, misdiagnoses due to COVID, heart attacks, other examples where the body is malfunctioning due to either trauma or extreme stress, but they're young, healthy 20-somethings who don't need that level of care according to the system, and they died. And I think that's criminal. Also, while a lot of my friends did commit suicide, it was only after they attempted to seek help. And that's just such a critical point for me, because I grew up with this narrative in the Navy that like there was a big messaging system about like it's okay to be okay and just ask for help and help is available to you, da 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 da. And in my lived experience and in my classmates' lived experience, that is just not the case. There are so many people who are actively saying, no, I need help with this. This is not normal. I am unwell. And they are unable to get it. And those suicides came only after they attempted to get help because they knew that they were unwell. And so in my mind, the cause of death is not different. The cause of death is one thing and one thing only, and that is they were unable to get the medical attention that was required for them. And so if the Navy and the medical system cannot provide it, fine, we're going to try.
So did they provide support like after the shooting you experienced? What's the reaction to something like that?
immediately after, there was I think it's called a sprint team, where chaplains and like a crisis support team and like some like mental health professionals will be there for some time. Some time was a month max. And after that, it was very much a messaging of like business as usual. You're in the military, do it. And that's true. We are in the military. We did choose a specific lifestyle. And that is not the same thing as being murdered in your classroom. So I don't think that there was ever really a response to that. And there was the added component that the shooter was a Saudi Arabian flight school student. And so that goes to an international issue. And that's way above us as a collective at that time. And so I think that we very much felt that. I think that we felt well, I don't want to speak for everybody else. I'll speak for me. I think that I felt a responsibility to our geopolitical climate, knowing that this situation was much bigger than us. All the while knowing that many of the pilots on 9/11 were Saudi Arabian, and that's difficult to reconcile. It's difficult to reconcile your lived experience with high-mindedness and recognizing that we don't paint broad strokes. We don't attribute certain behaviors to an entire population. That's not fair. And it was our lived experience. So it's very difficult.
So would that have been like covered by the media at the time?
A few months after, or a month after the shooting, this was December 6th of 2019. And if you remember, the pandemic started about January, February of 2020. So there was not a lot of time to get media attention. And that was very convenient for, I think, US policymakers.
And where did this happen?
In Pensacola, Florida.
Wow. So you didn't really get what you would have expected from senior people in terms of like integrity or speaking openly about reality.
I don't think I can answer that question in a palpable way. So I think that I might choose not to answer that question, but my lack of answer is an answer on its own. If we can surmise from that.
So what about the suicides in general, or like these health issues? Is the military like acknowledge it and address it or like talk about?
No, they do not. They do not. And I'm mindful about how that shows up in each individual scenario. I've been in really horrible situations. And when you're in really horrible situations, at like the fog of war, you can use that metaphor, it's difficult to make good decisions. And so I have a lot of grace and space in my heart for these individual circumstances. And so I don't think that we can fairly assess that the military is not taking these tests seriously, because that's not really the climate that this is operating in. However, I think that's where I come in. I think that that's my job here, is to demand that people recognize that this is a systemic issue, and the evidence shows it. This is not about hurt feelings. This is about dead people, dead kids, right? Dead children. They were in their 20s. The Ashley was the oldest and she was 26 years old. And she died of a blood clot? What are you talking about? It's not normal. And so every one of those individual cases can be explained on an individual level. That is true. It is also true that this is a systemic issue. And again, I believe that that's my role. And that's what Healing Can't Wait is meant to do.
And because it's like something that the country needs, it's kind of, because I'm just thinking
Absolutely.
of coming from like banking and whatever. There's a lot of in like law and banking, and there's a lot of like people die and bad stuff, but it's kind of like,
Yes.
okay, you're choosing to do that. Whereas for the military, it's like, oh no, the country like needs, I mean, we still need a financial system, but you know what I mean? It's like, it's like a priority of the country.
So glad you brought that up. So my head's in a couple of places. One, exactly. Because especially in America, we idolize the military. We just do. It's a part of our existence, at least in this century. And through that idolization, there's a lot of heartstrings attributed to protecting the military to the best that we can on a societal level. And so I deeply believe that when the military starts to look at healthcare differently and demand differently for the services, society will follow. The healthcare system writ large in America is not working. Everybody knows that. We know that deep in our soul. And we feel powerless to fix it. And I don't have an answer to that question specifically. What I do know is that these holistic treatments that have been around for thousands of years work. And that's the movement that's coming with Healing Can't Wait. So that's part of it. The other part of it is linking extreme stress to not just mental health and unwellness, but to physical disease. There is chronic pain and PTSD operate in the same field. They are not, in fact, different. It's just healthcare. So there's no sense in siloing these specific symptoms in the way that our healthcare system does, because that's not how it's experienced in our vessels. And if we have the sample set of the military, we can prove that on a bigger level. And so the finance piece is critical because a lot of people are dying in baking right now, which is also crazy. 20-somethings should not be dying of heart attacks. It's not normal. And so we have to critically examine what extreme stress for what is costing life. And do we value life? And maybe the answer is no. And I don't like that answer, but maybe that is the answer. We don't always like the answers we're given. But I don't think we've asked the question. And it's important to ask the question and ask ourselves honestly, so that we can potentially make different decisions in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like the world is heading in that direction, hopefully, I think, about like everything. The mind is obviously connected to the body. And I don't know, I just read The Body Keeps the Score. I can't believe that was written like 20 years ago or something. And it's almost like, because that has a lot about Vietnam vets and PTSD and...
Exactly.
Yeah, I feel like people are kind of waking up to this. Even with mental health, how it's like, it's just this book of definitions that like a group of people decide like how to define stuff. But it's like...
Exactly.
For children who have been sexually abused, they're going to be messed up and like just trying to put in a box of like, oh yeah, I think you're more depression, or I think you're more this. It's like we can actually like heal from the wound rather than just diagnosing and then all the pharmaceuticals and blah, blah, blah.
Exactly. And I lived that. that's a part of my real life 3D experience. And so what I took from that is, again, these treatments healed me quickly. And it was all about coming back to the body, coming back to our original state, if you will, and healing from the root, as opposed to playing whack-a-mole with pharmaceuticals, with the DSM-5, with these questionnaires and statistics. And I have a math degree too. Nonsense. This is nonsense. Like, we need a different sample set. We need a different study. And we haven't studied it. If you remember in The Body Keeps the Score, we have not studied this robustly. We just haven't. And we haven't asked the right questions. And that's really my dream. And if I could manifest anything, it would be this, that Healing Can't Wait is able to take a research grant, like an educational research grant, and ask the right questions to affect this outcome. The outcome being, I know the link between chronic pain and organ failure and all the things in the physical body, and the link to PTSD and trauma. I also know that healing is not questionnaires in doctors' offices and pharmaceuticals. Sometimes it's necessary. I don't want to be crass here. That level of care is absolutely necessary, especially when you're in a crisis situation. But that's not what healing looks like. So how do we define healing, and what does that look like? I believe that Healing Can't Wait can answer those questions if given the financial opportunity.
Cool. And so were you in touch with any of this stuff during your time at the Navy, or did it all kind of come afterwards when you had to go on this journey?
Both. So I've always been a tree hugger. I've always been very mindful of my like my connection to nature generally. Like, I've always been like an outdoor girl and needing to spend time outside and that sort of thing. And I think I got more and more away from that as I progressed in my career in the military. And then when I got sick, when you're stripped to the bone, you have to be thoughtful about what you pick back up. And it wasn't even that it came back to me. It's like I remembered it. Like, it wasn't something I learned for the first time. It's like I remembered how important it is for me to be around things that are green. I remember how important it is for me to be in community with people and talk about things that are hard. I remembered that it's important to listen to the wind, to the ocean if it's around you, but to water. Like, the sounds of nature are so important, and dedicating time to do those things. So, but that was all a part of my childhood, and it's really cool to reflect on it now, because it all came back to the same thing, my connection to the trees. And a lot of it's an expression of the same, I would say. So getting sick and losing my career that I worked relentlessly for, and dealing with that level of trauma and heartbreak absolutely forced me to take different approaches. Those approaches are things that I had always known. I read Western Body, Eastern Mind ages ago. I've been practicing yoga since I can remember. I've been doing those things forever, and now they just have I wear them differently, if you will.
How did you meet your husband, by the way?
Yeah, great question. So in the midst of all of this, I met my husband while I was training before I went to Bahrain. So I had just finished intel school, so this was like 2021, so recently. This all happened in like the recent years. I talk about it like it was a lifetime ago, but this is like recent history. So in 2021, I had just graduated intel school. I was voluntold to go out to Bahrain to take on this task force. And before I did that, I had to go to a specific school because it's called mine warfare, and mine warfare doctrine's pretty specific. It's unlike other doctrine. For lots of reasons. But again, we don't need to get into military doctrine on this podcast. That's not the point. So I was there for a school, and my friend, this is kind of cringy, my friend from cryptology school back in the day had a crush on me and like asked me to go out, and he invited me to his improv show. And I had told this friend that, like, I'm moving, this doesn't make sense, da 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 da, and all of those things were absolutely true. I go to this improv show that Harsh is also performing at, and we all go out afterwards, and this girl had a crush on my now husband, and my friend has a crush on me. But my now husband and I were pretty inseparable, and we've been inseparable ever since. So that's how we met at an improv show.
Wow, but then you moved straight away. You just stayed in contact.
Yeah, I'm like I said, we've been pretty inseparable. Maybe physically we've been separated, but like energetically we've been pretty inseparable since we met.
Where was that?
In San Diego. So I went to Intel school, did this school in San Diego, go to Bahrain, get medically evacuated back to San Diego because my husband lived there.
And at what point did you get married?
In like January 2022. So like right before I got really sick.
And then you both moved to the UK?
No, he's still in the US. So you can't, he's from India, so you can't immigrate to two countries at once. And I think sometimes we're our best selves when we're not under the same roof. At least we're trying to figure that out. So no, he's in the US and I'm here.
Wow. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But you get to see each other.
Yeah.
Travel back and forth.
Yeah, we have just a very specific dynamic. And it's unusual for sure, but I don't know. I've never like not felt fulfilled in that relationship. We're very different, and we both have like our life's purposes, and that's something that we promised each other like early on, that like our relationship would never interfere with our life's purpose. And so I feel very supported to be out here and like not forced to live a life I don't want to live, and vice versa. I mean, he wants to live in the US and he wants to make that happen, and I want to support that. So I think that we just make it work. It's unusual, but it works for us.
Yeah. I feel like it's probably not that unusual. People have all different kinds of setups. I mean, like anyone in the military, you're going to be traveling a lot of the time.
Absolutely. And I mean, and that's another thing too, right? It's like when we got married, I wasn't planning on getting sick and getting out of the Navy. So before we got married, I was supposed to be abroad indefinitely. Like that was a part of the dynamic from the onset. So it's not like it's different than what we originally talked about, but in a lot of ways the essence is the same.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, we need to wrap up. But what else? I'm like, you need to tell people about like if they want a human design reading. I have had a human design reading with Aspen and it was amazing. So if anyone wants one,
Thank you for that tip. I'm super passionate about human design. I absolutely love it. It was incredible when you just like offered that in the group chat, because like a bunch of people booked after that, which was really, really awesome. I'm definitely calling that in. World Aquarian Aspen, I would love to have human design readings like at least 3 times a week, and then doing a magic mala session like every other week. That would be miraculous, and it would just, of course, businesses are businesses, so they have to like function, right? They have to they have to like actually have some success. And so what success looks like to me, it would be a type of schedule like that. But it's challenging when you move all the time. It's challenging when you're a part-time mystic. So when you put it in the group chat, that was very, very helpful. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
And do you want to quickly explain what the Magic Mala stuff is?
Yeah, I would love to. So the Magic Mala is like a download that I received. I mentioned that my husband's from India, so a lot of tradition from the Hindu aspect is a part of our family, a part of our culture, including the mala. And so mala it's translated from garland. So if you're more familiar with the Christian, Catholic specifically tradition, rosary also means garland, but in Latin. So it's like the same word, different languages. And so a mala is a garland, and a magic mala specifically has all the components of a mala itself. And I explained that on a call. And then what I call a magic mala is where the download comes in. I'll show it to you here. I recognize people are listening to it auditorily, but the garland is made with crystals, and those crystals are selected based on your current human experience. So the thing you want to move through and maybe past, but also what you want to call more in of or manifest. So on a call, I will explain the anatomy of the mala itself, which is inherently sacred. And then we'll do a brief human design reading. So that means going over your energy type, your authority, and your profile. And then the profile is what will then be the pattern of the magic mala. So I'm a 6-2, so you'll see it's in sets of 6, 2, 6, 2. And then the stones themselves are selected, like I said, based on your current human experience. So we'll do all of that on a call. And I use my skill set to needle as necessary into the frequency that which things are coming from. So like we kind of get to the core essence of both what we're manifesting and what we're letting go of. And then I pick crystals specifically for that thing. So if you've ever been in a crystal shop and you're like, how do I know what crystal's for me? And then the answer will almost always be choose the one that's calling you. Okay. That doesn't land with everybody. It certainly didn't land with me. And so this is a very like prescriptive way to develop relationship with crystals that are selected again for you specifically in this moment in time specifically. So it's a really beautiful way to integrate your spirituality and your 5D world with your in real time, right now, 2024 world as well. So that's a little bit about the Magic Mall. I'm super passionate about it, so I can talk about it all day.
Yay. Okay. And where can people find you?
Yeah, you can go through my website. It's aspenaurora.com. It's the Punjabi Aurora, not the Princess Aurora. So Arora. And that'll be my Instagram handle as well. So Aspen, ASPEN, and then ARORA, Aurora. And most of my content is on Instagram. And you can find me on my website as well.
Amazing. Such a good name.
Thank you.
It's like, I can't believe it's your actual name.
Yeah, my maiden name is Bentley, so like Aspen Bentley Aurora. I got really lucky.
Cool. Okay, last 3 questions.
Yeah.
What book has had a big influence on your life?
I read incessantly, so it's a difficult question to answer, but the dropped-in answer in this moment is actually Love That Dog. It's a short children's poetry book, and it's about love and grief and joy and like the simplicity of it. And I just love it. So I'm going to answer Love That Dog. It's a children's poetry book.
Nice. How do you stay grounded?
Ritual. I stay grounded through ritual. So that means like my candles, being outside, like 2 feet on the earth, very important. Calendars. So like the ritual of planning and like making sure that I'm my time is appropriately accounted for. It keeps me honest, and yeah, I'll leave it at that. That's how I stay grounded. And breath work. Okay, that was I was like I feel like I'm missing something. Breath work. Really central channel breathing. So moving through the chakras. So I'm just gonna make a quick plug. Sanskrit is a vibrational language, and so it's pronounced chakras, not chakras, right? Um, because it's a vibrational language, that pronunciation is important. Otherwise, it's meaningless. So chakras. When you breathe and connect your chakras in your energy centers, and you both call in from above and connect into below the earth, that helps me stay grounded.
Cool. Wait, what do you mean about the calendar thing keeping you honest?
So I mean, I manage a lot, right? I have a full-time job, I run a business, and I run a nonprofit, and I really love traveling. So the only way to make those things work in a 24-hour day is to plan appropriately. And the only way to not burn out is to plan appropriately. So if I just say yes to everything because I'm an energetic person, then I will be tired and grumpy. That actually happened recently when I was in Cornwall. I was so excited to be there, but I was so tired and I was unable to enjoy it. But that's because I scheduled too much. So the ritual of having a physical planner just keeps me honest in the fact that like I can strategically map how I want things to go. I would argue it's a manifestation tool as well. It's like its own form of expansion, to use a TBM word, because I'm showing myself that it is possible to do all of these things and do them effectively.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm so glad I understand human design because it's like, there's no way I could do all the things you do. And it's like, oh, I'm a projector. I'm not meant to.
Correct. Yes, ma'am. Exactly. And that's why I led with like, I'm a manifesting generator. So this is energetically correct for me. We all have our superpowers in human design, and being able to manage that level of commitment is energetically correct for a manifesting generator. Every energy type has their superpower. That happens to be the mangens.
Okay, last question. What 3 words describe the best version of Aspen?
Oh, that's a good question. Seeker. Lover. Maybe growth. I wish I had time to think about that answer, but I think that's a good one for now. So seeker in the sense that like exploring and learning and listening and and having that shape me. That's what I mean by seeker. Lover. I'm very passionate, and I love life, and I love people, and I'm gonna get misty. Like that, I deeply believe that that's what is the thing that sets us apart, especially in context of the shooting. And I even said that in a speech once that we should feel sorry for people like that because they will never know love the way that we know love. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. And so, lover and growth. I love nature and I love watching things grow and the ecosystems through which they operate and the metaphors of how that feels, looks, is in our real life. So
beautiful. Thank you so
thank you.
much.
Thank you so much.